The grand wooden doors of St. Benedict's Cathedral groaned open, spilling golden sunlight across the marble floor. Dozens of well-dressed guests filled the pews, murmuring in anticipation. Fresh lilies adorned the altar. The organ played soft, sacred melodies. And at the center of it all stood Reverend Father Damien, tall and serene, yet deeply unsettled. Father Damien was a man of rare spiritual depth. Decades of priesthood had honed his discernment, but in the last 10 years, visions, divine whispers in dream and prayer, had come with alarming clarity. Sometimes they were of joy and healing. Other times they were dark, filled with warnings. That morning, as he dressed in his white vestments, he had felt the first wave of unease. It was subtle at first, a tremor in his spirit. But as he stepped into the sacristy to pray, the tremor became a storm. His eyes had closed in prayer. His lips murmured the familiar Latin rites. And then, flash, darkness, thick and suffocating. A woman in a white gown stood barefoot in the middle of the church. Her face was hidden behind a veil, but her hands were soaked in blood. At her feet, a man lifeless, his eyes staring upward in disbelief. And then the woman turned slowly, as if she sensed him watching. Her eyes were bottomless. And in that instant Father Damien knew. The woman was the bride. The groom, Chuka Nwankwo, was a known figure in Lagos. At 39, he had built a telecommunications empire from the ground up. Hard-working, generous, and fiercely private, Chuka had no known scandals and was the favorite bachelor in elite social circles. But love had evaded him until 2 years ago, when he met Edeora. Edeora was enchanting. There was no other word. Her beauty turned heads, but it was her grace, intelligence, and empathy that drew people in. She had been introduced to Chuka at a charity ball. Within 6 months, they were inseparable. Within a year, engaged. And now, today, their wedding day. Father Damien had counseled them both during pre-marriage classes. Chuka had been open and sincere, eager to learn. Edeora had answered everything correctly, yet something about her had never fully sat right with him. She was polished, too polished. She gave no real flaws, no vulnerabilities. Everything about her was immaculate. At the time, he had chalked it up to nerves or pride. But now, with the vision burning in his mind, he could no longer ignore the signs. "Are you all right, Father?" Sister Agnes whispered from behind. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes scanned the church, guests smiling, whispering, the choir preparing for the hymn. Then his gaze stopped at Edeora. She stood near the entrance, arm linked with her father's. Her white gown shimmered. Her veil was lowered, but he could see her smile. It was perfect, too perfect. And suddenly, the vision returned in pieces. Blood, silence, shadows behind the veil. He could not bless this union. He turned to the groom, who stood waiting at the altar, unaware. Father Damien stepped down quietly, walked to Chuka, and whispered something into his ear. Chuka blinked. "What?" "I need to speak with you. Now," the priest said, more firmly this time. The murmuring in the pews grew louder. Adeora's father looked confused. She looked frozen. Whispers echoed across the marble walls. "What's happening?" "Something wrong." Chuka followed Father Damien out of the sanctuary and into the sacristy. Behind them, the wedding came to a halt. "Father, what is this about?" "You're scaring me," Chuka asked, his voice hushed but tense. Damien sighed. "I had a vision." Chuka's brows furrowed. "A vision? Of what?" "Of death. Of you lying in a pool of blood at this altar. And her, Edeora, standing over you." She wasn't crying. She wasn't even surprised. "I've never had a vision that vivid." There was silence. Chuka ran a hand through his hair, his confusion morphing into irritation. "Father, I respect you. I've known you since I was a boy. But this is my wedding day. Are you seriously telling me to cancel it over a dream?" "It wasn't a dream," Damien said. "And I'm not asking. I'm refusing. I cannot, in good conscience, bless this union." You're overstepping, Chuka snapped, now visibly angry. I would rather overstep than bury you before the year ends. Back in the cathedral, the confusion had turned to chaos. Guests began standing. Eudora whispered furiously with her maid of honor. Her father approached the altar, demanding an explanation. It took only minutes for the news to spread. The priest has refused to bless the wedding. And then Chuka returned, face pale, hands clenched, and stood beside Eudora. We're calling off the wedding, he said simply. Eudora turned slowly to him, her eyes wide. What are you saying? I'm saying. We need time. This isn't right. Something isn't right. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but the venom in it was clear. You're embarrassing me. I'm sorry, he said. But we're not doing this today. And just like that, the ceremony was over. That night, Lagos was abuzz with gossip. Blogs speculated wildly. Some claimed Eudora had cheated. Others said Chuka got cold feet. But only 3 people knew the truth. Father Damien, Chuka, and Eudora. And all 3 had different stories. Damien spent the night in prayer, begging for clarity. His mind replayed the vision over and over. What disturbed him most was not just the death. It was the absence of remorse. Eudora had looked through the dead body like it was a piece of furniture. Chuka didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his mansion in Ikoyi, wondering if he had just thrown away the best woman he'd ever known, or saved his life. Eudora, meanwhile, sat in her hotel suite in Victoria Island, makeup still untouched, veil discarded on the floor. Her phone buzzed with calls and texts, but she answered none. Eventually, she opened a black leather journal. Inside were names. 5 of them. All crossed out. All former lovers. Except one. Chuka's name was at the bottom. And his wasn't crossed out. The next day, Chuka drove to St. Benedict's. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just him and the dusty sunlight of early morning. Father Damien sat alone in the small chapel beside the main sanctuary. I need the truth, Chuka said as he sat down. The priest folded his hands. You already know it. No, I know what you said. I know what you saw. But I need to know if there's something else, something real. Something you've sensed beyond the vision. Father Damien hesitated. Yes, he said finally. There's something about her spirit I can't explain. She speaks well. She presents herself like light. But in prayer I feel cold. Every time. As if she isn't really praying but watching. Watching what? Me. Watching what I believe. Testing how far she can go. Chuka exhaled, feeling a pit open in his chest. What if you're wrong? Then she's just a woman with secrets. But if I'm right? You were about to marry your executioner. 3 days later, Chuka made a decision. He hired a private investigator. It started quietly. Phone records, background checks, quiet interviews with Eudора's former university classmates. First, it was all clean. Eudora had an impressive CV. International schools, perfect grades, no police record. Her past relationships were short-lived, but no red flags. But then the cracks began to show. A man named Emeka Ugwu, her university boyfriend, had died in a car accident 2 months after they broke up. Another, Tosin Ajala, had gone missing in Ghana. And another, Kelechi Medu, was found dead in his home, no foul play suspected, but neighbors said he had complained of feeling watched weeks before his death. No connections had ever been made. Till now. Chuka's investigator found letters. Old, torn pieces of paper Kelechi had sent to a friend. Never mailed, just found in a box. They spoke of a woman he loved but feared. One he suspected was using him. The final letter read, "If anything happens to me, tell them to look at Eudora. She's not what she says she is." Father Damien stood in the confession booth when he heard the door open. Footsteps approached. Then a voice. Soft, sweet, unmistakable. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." He said nothing. "I came to confess," she said. "Not because I want forgiveness. But because I want to see if you're still afraid. Silence. I know what you did, she said. You ruined my wedding. Damien inhaled slowly. I saved a life. No, Adeora whispered. You interrupted fate. He stood. And as she walked out of the booth, she paused. He trusts you. But you should be careful. Sometimes knowing too much is a danger in itself. She left the chapel. Father Damien sat motionless, every hair on his body standing. The shadows were moving again. 3 days after the cancelled wedding, the once-admired bride, Adeora, vanished from public view. She deactivated her social media accounts, switched off her phones, and checked out of her hotel in Victoria Island without notice. Her family told reporters she was devastated and needed space. But in truth, Adeora was not grieving the loss of love. She was recalculating. In the echoing silence of his mansion, Chuka felt like he had awakened from a near-death experience. He hadn't touched food since the cancelled ceremony. Every corner of his house reminded him of the woman he almost married. The silk throw pillows she picked out, the wine she recommended, the perfume that lingered on the staircase. He stared out the window that Friday night, swirling a glass of untouched scotch in his hand, listening to the investigation report delivered over the phone by Femi, his most trusted private eye. She's careful, Femi said. Very. No police records, no paper trail, no direct link to the deaths. But there's a pattern. A chilling one, Femi replied. 3 of her exes, dead or missing. 2 of them after serious relationships. The others short flings. I even reached out to someone who knew her from her university days in the UK. She was called the Orchid, beautiful, exotic, and according to rumor, poisonous. Chuka said nothing. She was engaged before. To a man named Pascal Ogendype, big oil contractor. Called off the wedding 6 weeks before the ceremony. 2 months later, he was found dead in his pool. No foul play, heart attack, they said. But he was 37. Exactly. There was a pause. Chuka, Femi said, his voice dropping. This is more than coincidence. And she didn't come after you with lawyers, with scandal. Nothing. She disappeared. That's not heartbreak. That's retreat. Strategic. Like someone rearranging their next move. Reverend Father Damien had lived through many strange things in his years as a priest. Possessions, visions, even the occasional false prophecy. But nothing had ever chilled him like the whispered confession Adeora had made just days earlier. She hadn't come to repent. She came to warn him. Since that night, his dreams had been restless. He would see her walking through St. Benedict's with a crown of thorns on her head, whispering ancient words he couldn't understand. In one dream, she lit a candle at the altar and turned to him, smiling, her teeth replaced with tiny razors. He began fasting, praying more intensely, consulting scripture, and researching. One night, deep in his study, he came across a passage in the book of Proverbs. There is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. It echoed through his mind like thunder. Then he remembered something she said during their premarital sessions. Some women are born to guide. Others are born to possess. He hadn't thought much of it then. Now it chilled him to the bone. Chuka arranged a discreet meeting with Father Damien that Sunday evening. They met in the back garden of the rectory, under a mango tree that had stood for over 40 years. She came to me, the priest said before Chuka even spoke. When? 3 nights ago. Confession booth. But there was no repentance. She came to declare war, subtly. Chuka exhaled. So it wasn't just a vision. No, Father Damien said. She's darkness disguised as beauty. She sees men not as partners but prey. Chuka rubbed his temples. The strange thing is, I still feel drawn to her. Even now. That's the scariest part. Father Damien looked up, his eyes piercing. Darkness always comes wrapped in seduction. That's why it's effective. A week passed. The public moved on. The story faded from the headlines. But in the shadows, Adeora moved quietly. She checked into a small guest house in the outskirts of Lekki using a false name. There, she began assembling her tools again. She called an old contact, a man named Maku who specialized in solutions. Maku had a deep scar across his face and eyes like black stone. "It's not just any man this time," Edaora warned. "He's smart, but cautious." Maku grinned. "The smart ones bleed just like the fools." "I don't want blood," she replied coldly. "Not yet. I want him to crumble. I want him to regret the day he doubted me." "What's your plan?" "First we make him trust me again. I take everything." Meanwhile, Femi, the private investigator, had made a breakthrough. He tracked down an old woman in Nsukka named Mama Ijike, who claimed to have known Adeora's maternal grandmother. She described her as a herbalist, feared in the village. "People said she could turn a man's heart to dust with one touch," she said, her eyes trembling. "Did Adeora grow up around her?" Femi asked. "She lived with her after her parents died in that fire. But no one saw the girl much. She stayed inside most days. When she did come out, dogs would bark. Babies would cry." "Are you saying she's—" "I'm saying," Mama Ijike interrupted, "that some bloodlines carry more than just DNA." That evening, Chuka got a message from Edaora. Just 3 words. "Can we talk?" He hesitated. Every part of his brain screamed no. But another part, curiosity perhaps, wanted to see how far the rabbit hole went. He replied, "Tomorrow, 6 p.m. my house. Alone." He immediately called Femi. "I want cameras. Audio. Every corner of the house wired. If she slips up, I want proof." Femi agreed. "You're taking a risk. I need to know who she is. What she wants." At 5:45 p.m., Chuka sat in the living room of his Ikoyi mansion. The house was silent. No staff. No phones. Just a tumbler of water and a recorder hidden inside a flower vase. At exactly 6:03, Edaora walked in. She looked breathtaking. Hair tied back, no makeup, dressed simply in a cream-colored dress. She looked every bit the broken bride. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Chuka nodded, gesturing to the couch. "I won't lie," she began. "That day humiliated me. I cried for 3 nights. I didn't eat. I hated you. You should. But then I realized. I made mistakes. I wasn't open enough. I was afraid of being vulnerable. You made me feel too safe. And I confused that safety with weakness." Chuka watched her carefully. Her voice was soft, but there was something calculated behind her words. "I'm not here to beg," she continued. "I just want closure. I want to understand why." He took a breath. "Father Damien had a vision. He said he saw you in a very dark way. Said marrying you would be my death." Adeora's eyes didn't flinch. Instead, she let out a soft laugh. "And you believed him? Shouldn't I have?" Adeora leaned closer. "Chuka, do you remember the first time we met? That night at the charity gala. I didn't want to go. Had a fever. But I saw you and something told me you were different. Do you really think I would hurt you? Would you?" Her smile froze for a moment. Then she stood. "This was a mistake. I came here to heal, not to be accused." She turned to leave. But just before opening the door, she looked over her shoulder. "You should tell your priest to be careful. Sometimes those who see too much don't live long." That night, Femi delivered the recordings. One clip stood out. A faint rustle. Adeora's phone, dialing someone in her purse as she left. Then a whisper. "He's still not sure. We wait. But soon." Who was she talking to? Chuka asked. "I traced the number. Registered to a business name in Ghana. Shell company. Can't pin it. But I know someone who can. Do it. And Femi, get me a gun license. Fast." Father Damien received the envelope 2 days later. No sender. No note. Inside were photographs, taken with a zoom lens. Images of him praying in his chapel. walking through the market. One photo of him sleeping inside his room. Another, of him blessing a child outside church. Written on the back, "Even holy men bleed." The next Sunday, Chuka entered church during evening mass. He knelt at the back, far from the crowd. Father Damien saw him and ended the service early. They spoke in the rectory afterward. "She's planning something," Chuka said. "Not just me. You too. I know. I recorded her. She's still circling." Damien looked up. "Then we must end this." Chuka nodded. "But not with fear. I'll play the game a little longer. I'll draw her out. Let her think I want her back. You're risking everything. I already lost everything. If we don't stop her now, she'll do this to someone else." 3 weeks passed. Adeora made herself visible again, publicly reconciling with Chuka, attending small gatherings, smiling for cameras. Rumors of the couple's reunion spread. But behind the scenes, Chuka and Femi built a net. They traced Maka's phone. Found a hidden apartment in Badagry used by Adeora's associate. Inside, they discovered blueprints of Chuka's estate, names of his board members, and most damning of all, a black journal. The same one Adeora had once opened. Inside, in delicate handwriting, was the final entry. July 15th, wedding failed. Plan B initiated. Marriage will no longer suffice. Poison recommended. 2 doses. On July 18th, law enforcement raided the Badagry apartment. They found Maku. Arrested him without incident. He said nothing, until he saw a photograph of Father Damien. Then he spat. "The priest is the reason." She said he ruins fate. "What fate?" the officer asked. Maku smiled. "The fate of powerful women." The room was cold despite the heat outside. Father Damien stood still, holding the black journal retrieved from the raid. His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped through the pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. The names of 5 men, all struck through with neat lines. The last name, Chuka, circled twice in red ink. The final entry was direct. Poison recommended. 2 doses. Final act, before separation. He turned to the police detective across from him. "This is enough to convict." The man shook his head. "It's enough to suspect. But she didn't write it in her name. No fingerprints. Maka's staying silent. Without catching her in the act, we can't hold her." "Then we catch her in the act," Father Damien said quietly. "Before it's too late." The next morning, Chuka awoke to a text. "Adeora. Dinner tonight. Just us. We'll cook. One last try." The timing was no coincidence. She knew Maku had been arrested. She knew the walls were closing in. And yet she was doubling down. That confirmed it for Chuka. This wasn't about love. It never had been. It was about finishing the plan. "Still," he replied. 7 p.m., my house. I'll get the wine." Then he made 3 calls. First to Femi. Second to the police. And third to Father Damien. 7:05 p.m. Adeora arrived in a charcoal-colored SUV. She wore a crimson silk gown and carried a leather bag. No bodyguards. No driver. Just her. Inside the house, microphones were hidden in the kitchen, the dining room, even the chandelier. A backup camera had been placed behind the curtain rod. Outside, plainclothes officers waited in 3 unmarked cars. Chuka opened the door himself. "You look beautiful," he said. She smiled. "I always did." They hugged briefly. For a moment, he felt the familiar scent of her perfume, soft jasmine and something metallic beneath it. She entered the kitchen and began unpacking ingredients. She brought everything. Chicken breast, imported spices, even a bottle of wine. She insisted on doing it all herself. Chuka watched from a distance. He didn't say much. Neither did she. But at exactly 7:34 p.m., she opened her handbag, pulled out a small blue vial, and poured a few drops into the stew she was stirring. The camera behind the curtain rod caught everything. Femi, watching from the surveillance van outside, Radioed the police. Got her. Vial in hand. Suspected substance introduced into food. Proceed. But Chuka continued playing the part. He set the table, poured wine, and smiled like a man finally reconciled with love. By 7:45 p.m. they were seated. Edeora served him the stew. Generous portions. She did not serve herself. Chuka picked up his spoon and paused. "You're not eating." "I already ate," she said sweetly. "Too much salt for me." He stirred the stew slowly, then set the spoon down. "You know, I've been thinking about us." She tilted her head. "I think we should start over," he said. "New place. Maybe Dubai. Just the two of us." Her eyes lit up slightly. He leaned forward. "But before we plan that, tell me the truth." She froze. "What truth?" "I found the journal. The one with the names. Mine at the bottom. The plan to poison me. To take everything." Silence. Then a soft chuckle. "So you found it?" "Why?" he asked. Her smile faded. "Because men like you never leave room for women like me to rise." "I loved you." "No," she said. "You loved the idea of saving me. You wanted to possess me. But I don't belong to anyone." He stood. "I could have killed you, Chuka. You wouldn't have known. I could have burned this whole house to the ground. And they'd call it a tragedy. You still can't admit it, can you? That I'm darkness," she whispered, stepping closer. "Father Damien already said it. You believed him. Now you believe it too." Then she tilted her head, voice like ice. "Funny how people always fear the woman with power. But the man with the gun, they call him strong." The door burst open. Police officers stormed in, weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them. Now." Dora didn't move. She looked at Chuka one last time. "You could have been the exception." Then slowly she raised her hands. She was arrested on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and possession of a toxic substance with intent to harm. The vial tested positive for a rare herb-based neurotoxin. Fast-acting, undetectable after death. The trial took 4 months. Her lawyers claimed it was all fabrication, that she was framed, targeted for being a strong woman in a patriarchal system. She played the victim well. The press ate it up. But the evidence was overwhelming. Recordings, the journal, the vial, her phone calls with Maku. In court she was composed, even regal. When asked why she didn't deny the charges, she said simply, "I never deny what I am. You just couldn't handle it." She was sentenced to 25 years in Kirikiri Maximum Security Prison. After the verdict, Chuka stood outside the courthouse with Father Damien beside him. Reporters swarmed. "Mr. Nwankwo, what do you have to say?" He looked at the cameras. "I nearly married my end. But God had other plans." Father Damien placed a hand on his shoulder. "The devil always wears perfume," he murmured. Months passed. Chuka returned to his business, but he was never the same. He changed his estate staff, donated heavily to domestic violence shelters, and funded a new wing for psychological counseling in his late mother's name. One evening, he visited St. Benedict's alone. Father Damien welcomed him with a quiet smile. "I'm here to say thank you," Chuka said. "Not to me," the priest replied. "To the one who sees what we can't." Chuka knelt before the altar. Outside the bells rang. Back in her prison cell, Edeora sat cross-legged on her bed. She had a new journal. Inside a list of names. Not of lovers this time, but of women. Women she would write to, correspond with. Women who admired her. Who called her misunderstood. And at the very bottom, one name circled 3 times. Father Damien.